The morning sun cast long shadows across the military compound as Elena Voss approached the weapons depot. Her boots clicked against the concrete with steady determination, each step echoing her resolve. She had been planning this moment for 3 years, ever since the night her village burned and her family disappeared into smoke and screams. Elena pushed open the heavy metal door and stepped inside. The smell of gun oil and cold steel filled her nostrils. Rows of weapons lined the walls like sleeping predators waiting to be awakened. She had memorized this layout during her 6 months of service, noting every camera angle and guard rotation. Sergeant Mills looked up from his paperwork, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Morning, Elena. What brings you to my domain so early?" "I need a weapon, Sergeant," Elena said, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her chest. Mills chuckled and gestured toward the standard-issue rifles. "Well, you've come to the right place. What kind of mission are you heading out on? Training exercise?" Elena shook her head slowly. "Something more personal." The sergeant's smile faded slightly as he studied her face. Something in her eyes made him pause, a darkness that seemed to swallow light. He had seen that look before in soldiers who had lost everything. "Personal how?" Mills asked, his hand unconsciously moving toward the radio on his belt. Elena reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a small, folded piece of paper. She placed it on the counter between them with the careful precision of someone laying down a winning card. "I think you should see this first." Mills picked up the paper and unfolded it. His face went pale as his eyes focused on the image printed there. It was a photograph of a symbol burned into wood, a black Talon mark that curved like a crescent moon with 3 parallel scratches beneath it. The sergeant's hands began to tremble. "Where did you get this?" "It was carved into the door of my family's house," Elena said, watching his reaction carefully. "Right before they were all murdered." Mills set the paper down and stepped back, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Elena's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "You know exactly what that mark means. You know who uses it. And you know why I'm here." The weapon depot fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Mills looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. His training told him to call for backup, but something deeper, something that had been buried for years, held him back. "That symbol," Mills whispered, "it's from the old unit. The one that was disbanded after the incident in Karavac." Elena nodded. "The Black Talon Squad. Off-the-books operations. War crimes covered up by higher command. My village wasn't collateral damage, was it, Sergeant?" "It was a target." Mills sat down heavily on a crate of ammunition. The weight of old secrets seemed to settle on his shoulders like a lead blanket. "How do you know about Karavac?" "Because my father was there," Elena said. "He was a local interpreter for your unit. He saw what happened to those civilians. He kept records, photographs, evidence of what the Black Talon Squad did to innocent people." The sergeant closed his eyes, and Elena could see him traveling back in time to a place he had tried to forget. "Your father, he was supposed to keep quiet about what he saw. He did keep quiet. For 15 years, he never spoke about it. But someone found out he had evidence. Someone who couldn't risk it coming to light." Elena leaned forward. 3 years ago, they came to my village. They killed everyone who might have known what my father knew. My mother, my 2 younger brothers, my grandmother. They burned our house with the bodies inside." Mills opened his eyes and looked at her with something approaching pity. "And you survived." "I was away at university. When I came home, there was nothing left but ashes and that mark burned into our door. A message. A signature." Elena's voice remained steady, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the counter. "I've spent 3 years tracking down everyone who was part of that unit. Learning their names, their faces, their new identities." The sergeant stood up slowly, his military bearing returning despite the emotional weight of the conversation. "Elena, whatever you're planning, it won't bring them back. I'm not trying to bring them back, she said. I'm trying to make sure this never happens to another family. Mills walked over to a locked cabinet and entered a code with shaking fingers. Inside were weapons that weren't part of the standard military inventory, tools designed for operations that officially never happened. He stared at them for a long moment. There were 7 of us in the Black Talon squad, he said without turning around. 3 are already dead. 1 died in a car accident 2 years ago. Another was found dead in his apartment last year. The 3rd one had a hunting accident 6 months ago. Elena said nothing, but Mills could feel her presence behind him like a cold wind. That leaves 4, he continued. Including the commanding officer. General Morrison, Elena said. Mills turned around, his face grave. You know about Morrison? I know he's giving a speech at the Veterans Memorial next week. I know he'll be surrounded by security. I know that getting close to him through normal channels is impossible. Elena paused. But I also know that you have access to weapons that could reach him from a distance. The sergeant looked at the paper again, at the symbol that had haunted his dreams for 15 years. He thought about the families destroyed in Karabakh, the children who died because his unit couldn't risk exposure. He thought about the promotions and decorations that came afterward, blood money disguised as honor. If I help you, Mills said quietly, it won't just be Morrison who goes down. The whole chain of command that covered this up, everyone who buried the evidence and promoted the perpetrators, they'll all be exposed. Good, Elena said. Mills reached into the cabinet and withdrew a case containing a high-powered sniper rifle. It was a weapon designed for precision kills at extreme range, the kind used by ghosts who struck and vanished without a trace. This belonged to our sniper, Mills said, setting the case on the counter. He was the 4th one who died. Hunting accident, they said. But I always wondered if someone was cleaning house, tying up loose ends. Elena opened the case and ran her fingers along the weapon's sleek barrel. What was his name? Marcus Chen. He was a good soldier before he got mixed up with Black Talon. He tried to refuse some of the orders near the end, said we were crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. Mills shook his head. Morrison made it clear that refusing wasn't an option. Where is Chen buried? Military cemetery outside the city. Section J, row 15. Mills paused. Why? Because he was the first one to stand up to Morrison. He deserves to know that his death meant something. Elena closed the case and lifted it off the counter. Thank you, Sergeant. Mills watched her walk toward the door, then called out, Elena, wait. She turned back. Morrison isn't just a general anymore. He's being considered for Secretary of Defense. If he gets that position, he'll have even more power to bury the truth. Mills took a deep breath. But if something were to happen at that memorial speech, if certain evidence were to surface at the same time? Elena nodded. I understand. There's a safety deposit box at First National Bank. Box 247. The key is taped under the 3rd drawer of my desk. Mills sat down again, suddenly, looking older than his years. Everything's in there. Photos, documents, recorded confessions from soldiers who couldn't live with what we did. Your father's evidence too, what we recovered from the house before we burned it. Elena's breath caught. You kept my father's evidence? Some of us knew that someday, someone would come looking for the truth. We kept it as insurance, in case Morrison ever decided we knew too much. Mills looked up at her. Your father was a brave man. His evidence is what's going to bring them all down. Elena walked back to the counter and placed her hand over Mills' weathered fingers. Thank you for choosing the right side. I chose the wrong side 15 years ago, Mills said. This is just me trying to balance the scales. Elena headed for the door again, the rifle case heavy in her hands but her heart somehow lighter. She paused at the threshold and looked back one more time. Sergeant, what will you do when they realize the weapon is missing? Mills smiled grimly. I'm going to report a break-in. Someone jimmied the lock, disabled the cameras, and stole government property. Whoever it was knew exactly what they were looking for and how to get it. He shrugged. Must have been a professional. Elena returned his smile. Must have been. She stepped out into the morning sun, the weight of 3 years of planning finally condensing into action. The memorial speech was in 5 days. She had preparations to make, a position to scout, and a shot to perfect. As she walked away from the weapons depot, Elena didn't notice the figure watching from the shadows near the motor pool. Colonel James Hartford had been keeping an eye on the weapons depot ever since he learned that someone had been asking questions about the old black Talon squad. He had seen Elena enter and now watched her leave with something she hadn't carried in. Hartford pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Sir, we have a problem," he said when the call was answered. "Someone just armed themselves, and I think they're coming for you." On the other end of the line, General Morrison's voice was cold and measured. "Handle it, James. Like we handled the others." "Yes, sir." Hartford ended the call and began following Elena at a distance. He had been cleaning up Morrison's messes for years, and he was very good at his job. But, as he watched the young woman walking ahead of him, something about her steady gait and unwavering purpose made him wonder if this time might be different. Elena felt eyes on her back but didn't turn around. She had been expecting this moment since she first started asking questions about her family's death. They would come for her now, just as they had come for the others who knew too much. But, unlike the others, Elena was ready for them. She had spent 3 years preparing not just for her mission of justice, but for the war that would follow. The Black Talon squad had taught her an important lesson, though they didn't know it yet: sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted. The game had finally begun. Elena drove through the city streets with practiced calm, her eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. The dark sedan had been following her for 6 blocks, maintaining just enough distance to seem casual to anyone who wasn't trained to notice surveillance patterns. She recognized the technique because she had studied it, learned it, become proficient in it during her 3 years of preparation. She turned into a crowded shopping center parking lot and found a spot near the main entrance. The sedan continued past, but she caught a glimpse of the driver in her peripheral vision. Military bearing, crew cut, the kind of posture that never truly relaxed even in civilian clothes. She had seen the same type of man at each of the previous accidents that had befallen the Black Talon squad members. Elena walked into the mall carrying only her purse, leaving the rifle case locked in her car's trunk. She had work to do before she could worry about the weapon, and leading her tail into a public space would buy her time to think. The food court was buzzing with afternoon crowds, families with children and teenagers gathered around tables. Elena bought a coffee and found a seat where she could watch both entrances. 5 minutes later, the crew-cut man entered and ordered food, his eyes scanning the area with the subtle efficiency of a predator. Colonel James Hartford was good at his job, but Elena had spent 3 years studying men just like him. She knew how they moved, how they thought, how they justified the terrible things they did in the name of following orders. Her father had kept detailed notes about each member of the Black Talon squad, including their psychological profiles and behavioral patterns. Elena pulled out her phone and opened a messaging app. She typed quickly, "The package is secure, but the delivery schedule may need adjustment. Mutual friend suggests tomorrow's timeline." She sent the message to a number that would automatically route it through 3 different servers before reaching its destination. Within seconds, her phone buzzed with a reply: "Understood. Alternative venue prepared. Proceed with caution." Elena finished her coffee and stood up, deliberately walking toward the entrance where Hartford waited. She passed within 3 feet of him, close enough to smell his aftershave and see the small scar on his left hand. Close enough for him to see her face clearly and know that she knew he was there. Hartford tensed as she passed, his hand moving instinctively toward his jacket. But Elena kept walking, her pace steady and unhurried. She was sending a message: "I see you, but I'm not afraid of you." Outside the mall, Elena walked to her car and drove away, this time taking a direct route toward the cemetery where Marcus Chen was buried. Hartford followed, no longer bothering with subtlety. The game was out in the open now. The military cemetery sprawled across 50 acres of perfectly maintained grass, white headstones arranged in precise rows like fallen dominoes. Elena parked near Section J and walked to row 15, carrying a small bouquet of white roses she had purchased at the mall. Marcus Chen's headstone was simple black granite with his name, rank, and dates of service. No mention of the Black Talon squad or the operations that had ultimately cost him his life. Elena knelt and placed the roses at the base of the stone. "I'm sorry they silenced you before you could speak the truth," she whispered. "But your weapon is going to help me finish what you started." Hartford parked 50 yards away and watched through binoculars. He spoke into his radio. "Subject is at the Chen gravesite. Should I move in?" General Morrison's voice crackled through the radio. "Not yet. Let her play out her hand. I want to know what she knows and who else is involved." "Sir, she's armed and clearly has inside help. The weapons depot theft was too clean, too professional." "I'm aware of that, Colonel. Sergeant Mills has been relieved of duty pending investigation. But this girl isn't working alone, and I need to know the full scope of the threat before we eliminate it." Hartford lowered his binoculars as Elena stood up from the grave. "She's moving again, sir. Stay with her. And, James, remember what happened to the others who knew about Karavac. Sometimes accidents are the kindest option." Elena drove out of the cemetery and headed toward downtown, but instead of going home or to a hotel, she pulled into the parking garage of a large office building. Hartford followed her up to the third level and watched as she parked and entered the building through a sky bridge. Inside the building, Elena took the elevator to the 15th floor and walked into a law office. The receptionist looked up with surprise. "Ms. Voss, you're early for your appointment." "I know, Maria. Is Mr. Davidson available?" The receptionist checked her computer. "He's finishing up with another client, but he should be free in a few minutes." Elena sat in the waiting area and picked up a magazine, but her mind was racing. She had been planning this moment for months, knowing that once she took possession of the rifle, events would accelerate beyond her control. The appointment with Davidson was insurance, a way to ensure that the truth would come out even if she didn't survive to tell it herself. 20 minutes later, a distinguished man in his 60s emerged from an inner office and shook hands with a departing client. He spotted Elena and smiled warmly. "Elena, come in. You look like you haven't been sleeping well." Robert Davidson had been her father's friend and legal advisor. He was one of the few people who knew the full story of what had happened in Karavac and why Elena's family had been murdered. He was also the only person Elena trusted with her backup plan. His office was lined with law books and family photographs. Davidson closed the door and gestured for Elena to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "I received your message last night," Davidson said. "Are you certain you want to proceed with this?" Elena reached into her purse and withdrew a small digital recorder and a thick manila envelope. "Everything is in here. The complete recording of my father's testimony about Karavac, copies of all the evidence he collected, and a detailed account of how my family was murdered to cover it up." Davidson took the materials and locked them in his office safe. "Elena, you know there are legal ways to pursue justice. We could go to the FBI, the Justice Department, the press." "The press tried to investigate 3 years ago," Elena said. "The reporter who was asking questions about Black Talon Squad died in a car accident 2 weeks later. The FBI agent who was looking into the Karavac incident was transferred to a desk job in Alaska and told to forget what he'd learned." Davidson nodded grimly. "Morrison has a lot of influence." "Had a lot of influence," Elena corrected. "After tomorrow, that's going to change." The memorial speech. Davidson leaned back in his chair. "Elena, what you're planning is suicide. Even if you succeed, they'll hunt you down." Elena smiled for the first time since entering the office. "Mr. Davidson, I've been hunted for 3 years. The only difference is that now I'm hunting back." She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city streets below. Somewhere down there, Hartford was probably positioning himself to follow her when she left. Somewhere else, Morrison was preparing his speech for the memorial, never imagining that his past was finally catching up to him. "If something happens to me," Elena said without turning around, "you wait exactly 24 hours and, then, you release everything to the media. All of it. The evidence about Karavac, the cover-up, the murders of the squad members who tried to come forward. Elena, please reconsider this. Your father wouldn't want you to throw your life away for revenge." She turned back to face him. "This isn't revenge, Mr. Davidson. This is justice. There's a difference." Elena walked toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and, when you release the information, make sure you emphasize that Morrison is being considered for Secretary of Defense. The American people deserve to know what kind of man they're putting in charge of their military." Davidson watched her leave, then opened his safe and looked at the envelope she had left behind. Inside were photographs that made his stomach turn, documents that revealed the systematic murder of civilians, and recordings that would destroy careers and possibly bring down a government administration. He thought about calling the police, warning them about what Elena was planning. But then, he remembered the conversation he'd had with her father 15 years ago, when the man had come to him broken and terrified, carrying evidence of atrocities committed in the name of American freedom. Elena's father had died trying to do the right thing. Maybe it was time for someone to succeed where he had failed. Down in the parking garage, Elena got into her car and checked her phone. There was a message from an untraceable number. "Eagle's Nest confirmed. Wind conditions favorable. Green light for dawn operation." She started the engine and drove out of the garage, noting that Hartford's sedan was still there. He would follow her wherever she went next, which was exactly what she wanted. She needed him to see her going to a hotel, checking in, carrying her luggage up to her room. She needed him to think he knew where she would be tonight. But Elena had learned more than just marksmanship during her 3 years of preparation. She had also learned how to become invisible when it mattered most. The hotel was a mid-range chain with multiple exits and a layout she had memorized months ago. Elena checked in at the front desk, took the elevator to the 7th floor, and entered her room. She left the lights on and the television playing, then slipped out through the emergency stairs and exited through the hotel's service entrance. Hartford settled in for a long night of surveillance, watching Elena's hotel room window from across the street. He had night vision equipment and a clear view of her room. He could see the television flickering and occasionally caught glimpses of movement behind the curtains. What he couldn't see was that the movement was caused by a mechanical device Elena had rigged to move the curtains at irregular intervals. Elena herself was 15 miles away, in an abandoned warehouse where she had been preparing for this moment for 6 months. The warehouse had been a manufacturing plant before the jobs moved overseas. Now it served as Elena's training facility, complete with a shooting range that duplicated the exact distance and angle she would need for tomorrow's shot. She had fired this same rifle from this same position hundreds of times, until she could hit a target the size of a human head at 800 yards in any weather condition. Elena assembled the rifle with practiced efficiency, her fingers moving through the familiar motions in the dim light. The weapon felt balanced in her hands, perfectly calibrated to her grip and shooting style. Marcus Chen had been an artist with this rifle, and Elena had spent months learning to honor his craftsmanship. She loaded a single round into the chamber and took her position. 800 yards away, she had set up a target with Morrison's photograph attached to it. The picture had been taken from his official military portrait, the one that would hang in the Pentagon Hall of Heroes if his appointment to Secretary of Defense went through. Elena controlled her breathing, let her heart rate slow, and placed her finger on the trigger. The crosshairs settled on Morrison's forehead, steady as a rock despite the weight of 3 years' worth of grief and rage. She squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the empty warehouse like thunder. 800 yards away, the bullet tore through Morrison's photographed face and buried itself in the sand backstop Elena had constructed. Perfect shot. Center mass. Instant kill. Elena ejected the spent casing and caught it before it hit the ground. Tomorrow there would be no evidence left behind, no forensic clues to trace back to her. The rifle would be wiped clean and abandoned, just another ghost weapon in a war that officially didn't exist. She disassembled the rifle and packed it away, then walked to a corner of the warehouse where she had set up a small camp. A sleeping bag, some canned food, and a thermos of coffee. Everything she needed for her last night as Elena Voss. Tomorrow, after Morrison was dead and the truth was exposed, she would become someone else. She had new identity papers waiting, a new life plan in a country that didn't have extradition treaties with the United States. She would disappear just as completely as her family had, except this time it would be by choice. Elena lay in her sleeping bag and stared up at the warehouse ceiling, where pigeons roosted in the steel rafters. She thought about her mother's laugh, her brother's silly jokes, her grandmother's stories about the old country. She thought about her father's gentle hands and the way he used to read to her when she couldn't sleep. Tomorrow their deaths would finally have meaning. Tomorrow the world would learn what kind of monsters wore American uniforms and called themselves heroes. But tonight, Elena Voss allowed herself to grieve for the girl she used to be, the one who believed in justice and trusted that good always triumphed over evil. That girl had died with her family 3 years ago. What remained was something harder, sharper, forged in the fires of loss and tempered by the cold metal of a sniper's rifle. Tomorrow, that weapon would speak for the dead. Outside the warehouse, the city slept on, unaware that justice was coming with the dawn. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Veterans Memorial, a fitting sky for what General Morrison would later call the most important speech of his military career. He stood in his hotel room, adjusting his dress uniform and reviewing his notes one final time. In 3 hours, he would address a crowd of veterans, politicians, and military families gathered to honor the fallen. What Morrison didn't know was that he would be joining them before the ceremony ended. 8 blocks away, Elena moved through the abandoned office building like a shadow. She had scouted this position months ago, identifying it as the perfect sniper's nest for the memorial speech. The building had been scheduled for demolition next month, which meant minimal security and no witnesses to worry about. Elena climbed 12 flights of stairs to reach the roof access door. She had picked the lock during a previous reconnaissance mission and replaced it with an identical lock that opened to her own key. Every detail had been planned, every contingency considered. The rifle case felt heavier now, weighted with purpose and finality. Elena had carried this burden for 3 years, but in a few hours it would be over. Justice would be served, the truth would be exposed, and her family would finally be at peace. On the roof, Elena quickly assembled her shooting position. The memorial stage was clearly visible through her scope, the podium positioned exactly where intelligence reports had indicated it would be. She had a clear line of sight with no obstructions, perfect lighting conditions, and virtually no wind to affect her shot. Elena attached the rifle's scope and began the careful process of zeroing her weapon. She had practiced this shot hundreds of times, but life conditions were always different from training. Temperature, humidity, air pressure, all factors that could affect bullet trajectory by mere inches at 800 yards. At 9:30 a.m., the first security sweeps began around the memorial. Elena watched through her scope as Secret Service agents and military police checked every building, every rooftop, every possible position from which a threat could emerge. But they were looking for obvious threats, and Elena had learned to become invisible. The building she occupied was supposedly empty and scheduled for demolition. The rooftop access was locked and alarmed. The security sweep would note that the building was clear and move on to more likely threats. Elena had counted on their thoroughness working in her favor. At 10:15 a.m., the crowd began gathering at the memorial. Families of fallen soldiers, politicians making their required appearances, reporters covering what they expected to be a routine military ceremony. Elena recognized several faces through her scope, people she had seen in photographs while researching the cover-up of Karabakh. At 10:45 a.m., the VIP section filled with high-ranking military officers and government officials. Elena watched them through her scope, men and women who had built their careers on the graves of innocents. Some of them knew about Karabakh. Others were simply part of the system that made such atrocities possible. At 11 a.m., General Morrison arrived. Elena watched him step out of his official vehicle, flanked by security personnel and aides carrying his speech materials. Even at 800 yards, she could see his confident bearing, the way he moved like a man who had never doubted his own righteousness. Morrison made his way to the VIP seating area, stopping to shake hands with politicians and fellow officers. He smiled for photographers and exchanged pleasantries with the families of fallen soldiers, playing the role of the honored general to perfection. Elena adjusted her position slightly, settling the rifle more firmly against her shoulder. Her breathing was calm and controlled, her heart rate steady. 3 years of preparation had led to this moment, and she was ready. At 11:30 a.m., the ceremony began with military honors. A color guard presented the flags while a military band played the national anthem. Elena used this time to make her final scope adjustments, confirming range and wind conditions. At 11:45 a.m., Morrison was introduced as the keynote speaker. Elena watched him approach the podium through her scope. He looked older than his official photographs, gray around the temples and lines around his eyes. But there was no remorse in his face, no guilt for the crimes he had committed or the lives he had destroyed. Morrison began his speech by honoring the fallen soldiers whose names were engraved on the memorial wall behind him. He spoke of duty and sacrifice, of the price of freedom and the honor of military service. His voice carried clearly across the memorial plaza, amplified by the sound system. Elena listened to his words while keeping his head centered in her crosshairs. The irony wasn't lost on her that Morrison was speaking about honor while standing over the graves of the very people his unit had murdered in Karabakh. These brave men and women gave their lives so that others might live in freedom, Morrison declared, his voice rising with practiced emotion. They represent the best of America, the finest traditions of military service and personal sacrifice. Elena's finger found the trigger. Morrison's head filled her scope, steady and clear. She had waited 3 years for this moment, planned every detail, overcome every obstacle. All she had to do was squeeze the trigger and justice would finally be served. But something held her back. Through her scope, Elena noticed movement in the crowd below. In the family section, a young boy was watching Morrison with wide, admiring eyes. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old, wearing a child-sized military uniform and sitting next to a woman in morning dress. Probably the son and widow of a fallen soldier, listening to a general praise his father's sacrifice. Elena thought about her own father, how proud he had been of his work as an interpreter for the American military. How he had believed that he was helping to bring democracy and freedom to his homeland. The disillusionment had come later, when he witnessed the massacres and realized that some American soldiers were no different from the warlords they claimed to be fighting. But that little boy in the crowd didn't know about any of that. To him, Morrison represented everything noble about military service. If Elena pulled the trigger now, that child would watch his hero die violently in front of his eyes, adding trauma to grief he was already too young to bear. Elena's finger hesitated on the trigger. Morrison continued his speech, moving into a section about the importance of military leadership in dangerous times. The threats we face today require steady hands and experienced judgment, he said. We cannot afford to let our guard down or compromise our principles in the face of adversity. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Morrison was talking about principles while standing on ground watered with innocent blood. He was speaking about leadership while covering up war crimes. The hypocrisy was staggering. Elena refocused her scope and placed the crosshairs on Morrison's forehead. She controlled her breathing and began the trigger squeeze that would end his life and expose his crimes. Then, her radio earpiece crackled to life. Overwatch, this is Guardian. You have multiple hostiles converging on your position. Recommend immediate extraction. Elena's blood went cold. She had given herself this radio call sign as part of her operational planning, but she hadn't told anyone about her position. Someone else was speaking on her frequency, someone who knew exactly where she was and what she was planning. Guardian, identify yourself, Elena whispered into her throat. Mike, this is Marcus Chen, the voice replied. Elena's scope wavered as shock hit her like an electric current. Marcus Chen was dead, buried in the military cemetery where she had left flowers on his grave just yesterday. Impossible, Elena breathed. Overwatch, you need to listen to me carefully. Hartford's team has surrounded your building. You have maybe 5 minutes before they breach the roof access door. Your extraction route is compromised. Elena kept her rifle trained on Morrison while scanning the streets below with her naked eye. She could see black SUVs positioned at every corner around her building, tactical teams in position. Hartford had found her somehow. Who are you really? Elena asked. I'm exactly who I said I am, Chen's voice replied. The reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. I've been hunting the same people you're hunting, but from the shadows. When I learned about your mission, I knew I had to help. Elena processed this information while keeping her crosshairs on Morrison's head. The general was nearing the end of his speech, building toward his conclusion about the importance of honoring military traditions. If you're alive, why didn't you expose them yourself? Elena asked. Because they would have killed me for real this time, and because I needed someone clean to pull the trigger. Someone with the skill and motivation to finish what I started. Chen paused. But the situation has changed. If you take that shot now, you'll be dead before Morrison hits the ground. Elena could hear footsteps in the stairwell below, the careful movement of tactical teams ascending toward her position. Chen was right, she had minutes at most before they reached the roof. There's another way, Chen's voice continued. A way to expose Morrison and survive to see him pay for what he did. I'm listening, Elena said, though she kept her rifle aimed at Morrison's head. Do you have the safety deposit box key that Mills gave you? Elena reached into her pocket and felt the small metal key. Yes. Get to that bank. Retrieve the evidence. There's a reporter there waiting for you, someone who's been investigating Black Talon for years. Give him everything, and Morrison will fall without a single shot being fired. Elena could hear the stairwell door being forced open, followed by the sound of boots on concrete. Hartford's team was on the roof level now, probably checking every door methodically. Why should I trust you? Elena asked. Because 3 years ago, I watched your family burn, Chen's voice said quietly. I was there, Elena. I was part of the team that killed them. And I've been living with that guilt every day since. Elena's scope wavered again, but this time it was from rage rather than shock. You murdered my family? I followed orders to silence witnesses. Your father's evidence threatened to expose not just Morrison, but the entire military intelligence apparatus that created Black Talon. They told us it was a matter of national security. Chen's voice was thick with emotion. I was wrong, Elena. We were all wrong. And I've spent 3 years trying to find a way to make it right. Elena could hear voices in the hallway now, tactical teams positioning themselves outside the roof access door. She had perhaps 90 seconds before they breached her position. Morrison was concluding his speech at the podium below. In closing, let me say that the sacrifices made by these fallen heroes will never be forgotten. Their courage inspires us to be better, to serve with honor, to protect the innocent and defend the freedoms that make America great. Elena's finger tightened on the trigger. Morrison deserved to die for what he had done, for the lives he had destroyed, for the corruption he represented. One shot would end his career, his influence, his ability to hurt anyone else. But Chen was right about one thing. If she took the shot, she would die on this rooftop without ever seeing justice truly served. Morrison would become a martyr, his crimes buried with him. The truth would die with Elena, and the cycle of cover-ups would continue. The reporter, Elena said. Where? First National Bank, main branch downtown. Ask for Sarah Martinez from the Washington Herald. She's been waiting for someone like you for 5 years. Elena heard the distinctive sound of a breaching charge being prepared outside the roof access door. She had perhaps 30 seconds to make her decision. Morrison stepped back from the podium to thunderous applause. He waved to the crowd, basking in their adoration, completely unaware of how close he had come to death. Elena made her choice. She quickly disassembled the rifle and packed it into its case, then moved to the emergency rappelling line she had prepared as an escape route. The building's south face was hidden from the Memorial Plaza, invisible to the crowds and security teams focused on Morrison's speech. As Elena rappelled down the side of the building, the roof access door exploded inward behind her. Hartford's tactical team flooded onto the roof, weapons drawn, searching for a target that was already gone. Elena hit the alley behind the building and sprinted toward her escape vehicle, a motorcycle she had positioned 3 blocks away. Behind her, she could hear shouts and radio chatter as the tactical team realized their target had escaped. Elena started the motorcycle and raced through back alleys toward downtown, taking a route she had memorized specifically for this contingency. The rifle case was strapped to her back, and the safety deposit box key was clutched tightly in her gloved hand. At the First National Bank, Elena walked through the front doors like any other customer. The building was busy with morning banking traffic, providing perfect cover for her movements. She approached the customer service desk and asked to speak with Sarah Martinez. The woman who met her in a private office was younger than Elena had expected, maybe early 30s with sharp eyes and a digital recorder already running on the desk between them. "You're Elena Vos," Martinez said. It wasn't a question. "How do you know?" "Because I've been investigating your family's murder for 3 years, waiting for you to surface." Martinez leaned forward. "I know about Caravac. I know about Black Talon. And I know you just walked away from the perfect opportunity to kill Morrison." Elena placed the safety deposit box key on the desk. "I need to retrieve some evidence." "Box 247, Martinez said. "I've been waiting for someone to bring me that key." Together, they went down to the bank's vault level. Elena used the key to open the safety deposit box, revealing stacks of documents, photographs, and digital storage devices. Everything Mills had promised was there, plus materials Elena hadn't expected to see. "My father's original files," Elena breathed, recognizing her father's handwriting on some of the documents. Along with testimony from 3 other Black Talon survivors, Martinez added. Men who couldn't live with what they'd done and decided to come forward. Elena picked up one of the photographs. It showed Morrison standing over the body of a young girl in Caravac, smoking a cigarette while his men searched through the rubble of destroyed homes. The date stamp indicated it had been taken 3 days after the official end of military operations. "This will destroy him," Elena said. "It'll destroy more than just him," Martinez replied. "The cover-up goes all the way to the Pentagon. Morrison was just the tip of the iceberg." Elena spent the next 3 hours going through the evidence with Martinez, explaining the context of each document and photograph. By the end, they had enough material to bring down not just Morrison, but the entire chain of command that had enabled and protected the Black Talon squad. As Elena prepared to leave the bank, Martinez stopped her. "What will you do now?" Elena thought about the question. For 3 years, her entire existence had been focused on this moment of justice. Now that it was finally happening, she wasn't sure who she was supposed to be. "Disappear," Elena said finally. "There are still people out there who want me dead. What if I told you there might be another way?" Martinez smiled. "What if I told you that Markuschen wants to meet with you?" Elena stared at her. "He's really alive?" "Very much so. And he has a proposition for you." The meeting took place that evening in a secure location outside the city. Elena arrived armed and ready for a trap, but what she found instead was a man haunted by his own crimes and desperate for redemption. Markuschen looked older than his photographs, worn down by years of guilt and hiding. He sat across from Elena in an abandoned farmhouse, his hands shaking slightly as he spoke. "I know you have every right to kill me," he began. "I was there when your family died. I could have stopped it, but I chose to follow orders instead." Elena studied his face in the dim light. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Morrison isn't finished. Even with Martinez's story coming out, he has allies who will try to cover for him. The military will close ranks, claim this was all a rogue operation that they knew nothing about." Chen leaned forward. "But there are other operations, other Black Talon units still active. Morrison was just one head of a hydra." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "How many others?" "Dozens. Operating in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Somalia. Anywhere the American military has a presence and needs problems to disappear quietly." Chen pulled out a tablet and showed Elena a map with red dots scattered across multiple continents. I've been tracking them for 3 years, building a database of their operations and personnel. Elena stared at the map. Each red dot represented another potential Karavac, another family like hers destroyed in the name of operational security. What are you proposing? She asked. A partnership. You have the skills, I have the intelligence. Together, we can hunt down every member of every Black Talon unit and expose them before they kill more innocents. Chen met her eyes. I can't bring your family back, Elena. But I can help you make sure no other families suffer the same fate. Elena was quiet for a long time, processing the implications. She had come here for revenge against Morrison, but what Chen was offering was something larger. A chance to prevent future atrocities rather than just punish past ones. How do I know you won't betray me again? She asked. Chen reached into his jacket and withdrew a pistol, placing it on the table between them with the grip facing Elena. Because if you decide you can't trust me, you're welcome to finish what you started 3 years ago. Elena looked at the weapon, then back at Chen's face. She saw genuine remorse there, along with a determination that matched her own. Keep your gun, she said finally. But if you betray me, I won't need it to kill you. Chen nodded. Understood. 3 days later, Sarah Martinez's story broke across every major news network. The headline read, Black Talon Files, How a Secret Military Unit Committed War Crimes and Covered Them Up for 15 Years. General Morrison's nomination for Secretary of Defense was withdrawn within hours. By evening, he had been placed under arrest pending a military investigation. Within a week, 3 other high-ranking officers had been suspended, and Congress had announced hearings into the entire Black Talon program. Elena watched the coverage from a safe house outside the city, her new partnership with Chen already bearing fruit. They had identified the locations of 4 active Black Talon units and were planning operations to expose them. Her family's death had finally been avenged, but, more importantly, their sacrifice now had meaning. Elena Voss, the grieving daughter, was gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. She had become Elena Voss the hunter, and there were plenty of monsters left to find. The war for justice was just beginning, and Elena was ready to fight it for as long as necessary. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't a rifle or a bomb, but the truth itself. And the truth, once unleashed, was impossible to stop.